Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the review for Legacy of the Confederation by The Oracle. This review includes every released Legacy of the Confederation campaign. I feel confident in saying forever, but we'll just future-proof it and say for the Brood War stuff. Yes, this is the 2 campaigns released in 1999 and the 3, 4, 5 mission campaign that was released, Fallen Angel, in 2002? 2001. I'm pretty sure it was 2001. So that's what we're talking about. Now, I have to say a little bit of context for The Oracle, who this person is as a content creator. Their history after Legacy of the Confederation's final installment that was released for Brood War, which was in 2001, called Fallen Angel, is one of legend, where many people have encountered him and been told to sign like contracts or non-disclosure agreements about their stuff, and apparently he's got like an incorporated company or some sort of company, some sort of trademark going on with Nexus Core, because I've repeatedly seen, fiscal reports or stuff like where he's like locking down every expenditure that he has when it comes to voice actors and modelers and stuff like this. So he's spent money, he's invested money into his projects, but he's never finished them. And of course, personally, I can't understand how you would get to the point where you're investing money in something and not finishing it and releasing it, let alone why you would necessarily need to invest money into anything, because I've always had the thought process that if, by the time I'm involving somebody else that I'm paying money for, and ideally by the time that you're involving anybody else, unless it's a collaborative project, the project is demonstrably complete or very close to it, and you don't need very much beyond what this person is willing to offer you, and maybe a few other individuals are willing to offer you for money or for gratis, that, you don't need much more than what they have in order for the project to be actually complete. That would be the ideal scenario. Obviously, that's not something that happened with the Oracle, but admittedly, before we get into the many, many sort of quagmires that this campaign presented us as players trying to play it, and the many issues that I take with it, you do have to acknowledge that there was a lot of production value. And maybe that is reflected in the spending habits that the Oracle then made public in the years since the release of his campaigns. I don't know whether or not money exchanged hands back then, but regardless of whether or not it did, you still have to give him props for actually including, cutscenes, custom portraits, custom unit graphics, wholly custom things, not ripped from other places as far as we know. And that is something that speaks to a certain level of polish, a certain level of production value that you don't really see in custom content, generally speaking. You see 1 or 2 cutscenes outside of the ones created for Legacy of the Confederation, obviously the Fall from Grace one, and I feel like there's at least one other, but maybe not. Maybe those are the only 3. Either way, you have seen bits and pieces of it here, but rarely have you seen it centered around a single area. Obviously, the first campaign was very much lo-fi compared to the second campaign and Fallen Angel, especially. But, to full motion or whatever, whatever you would classify that as, cutscenes in the style of Blizzard Zone, even if they don't match the same quality by any means, definitely set it apart from other campaigns that have been released before or since. And that is something that you can't ever take away from the Oracle. He definitely did put in the effort. He contacted people who would be able to do things that he couldn't do himself. And yeah, he had a certain amount of vision, perhaps, that maybe didn't translate in actually playing his maps or trying to understand his story, but you could at least see sort of preserved in the end result as a result of all of this other work that was, went on. So got to give him props for that. However, I don't believe that I have ever received any confirmation as to what the hell was going on with why this campaign series is so beloved. I've never understood really the praise, because usually when I did hear about the praise, it was like, oh, there's custom units and custom graphics and they've got cutscenes. These are just like attributes, like files in a campaign, like not speaking of the content, or rather the content's quality, just that it exists. That doesn't really tell me a lot. I guess in compared like to other StarCraft campaigns, not every campaign has custom voice acting. Most campaigns don't, in fact, and most campaigns don't have custom units or tech trees or any changes at all graphically. It really just comes down to like bare minimum stuff where some of them don't, like I would say probably about half of them don't even have mods. So yeah, of course there is something to be said about that. But when you get past that, when you get past the idea that yes, this campaign has certain extras, we'll say, even though they should be just standard fare, and they just aren't for some reason in the custom content community for StarCraft. When you get past that, it's like, what exactly do you do? Where exactly do you go from there? How do you know that this is a high quality production? You can't just say it has X or Y. That doesn't tell me much beyond that the developer wanted to include those and somehow managed to do it, right? And of course, I as a developer have fantasized about figuring out ways for cutscenes like cinematics and that sort of thing to be placed into the projects. But that comes after the project's gameplay is established and, ideally after you've already figured out some elements of the story. And just playing the couple of campaigns that Oracle did release, it's very clear that the story was reverse engineered back into something that really doesn't make sense. But like that's the only thing I can think of is he created these stories and he like last minute tried to link them or something. Like that's what makes the most sense. You can sort of see where the Confederation and Legacy of the Confederation Part 2 links back to Part 1. But all of the other stuff related to the Oracle like doesn't seem to sync up, and then it's just like exposition to you at the end in the like Desler Oracle crossover stuff, and that was its own degree of insanity. And then of course like Fallen Angel loosely connects to the rest of that stuff by way of sharing the proper noun of a covert organization. Well, I guess technically two covert organizations that were exposition to you like through a briefing or something in one of the other campaigns. So it really the timelines don't converge properly. Nothing really links into itself. Even within the same campaign, many of the missions do not segue into each other nicely. They don't figure into each other nicely as far as a timeline goes. And you don't necessarily have to have a straightforward linear storyline where it just goes from one mission to the next. And this is a linear, chain of events. And of course, we talked about this at length when we discussed Echoes all the way back in, like, I think it was late 2017 or early 2018 or something like that, where we were talking about the very strange storyline that was at play there. I definitely think that there's something to be said for whether or not that makes some sense. That surely could work in an RTS context, but it wasn't an RTS campaign, so we can't really critique it on that note. As far as what you have there, maybe it can work. Maybe it can, but we don't know. We have not received, any confirmation on that because it's clearly did not work in this case. And much the same can be said for Legacy of the Confederation because its strange storyline where it was jumping between, viewports and perspectives, and none of them really nothing felt like it was leading up to anything, right? I guess you could compare this to a movie because honestly, there isn't that much that the gameplay the gameplay is just puzzles and gimmicks and random shit slapped on top of it, and then like the story catches up to the gameplay, as I've said many times about other productions, including proper AAA released games. But if you think about it as a movie, and you think about a movie that also has like a lot of viewports jumping around and perspectives jumping around, so that we can have some sort of corollary to it compare to, I'm sure most people are familiar with Lord of the Rings. And Lord of the Rings has several different viewports that jump around, and I haven't seen them in a while, but I do distinctly remember that it was building towards the confrontation with Sauron. And you have this idea that there's like this, you have to, drop this ring in Mount Doom and all this other stuff. Like so certain characters, even though there's bands of characters, and again, the viewports do jump around between the running time of an individual movie, just the fact that each character has an agenda, like some characters or some band of characters wants to secure the ring and get it themselves. Some of them just want to destroy the ring, and then others have mixed agendas or somehow figure into this larger confrontation. So you have some central confrontation that's set up, and then in order to destroy the ring, there's going to be some conflict and giant wars happening. So then another band of characters gets together to like prepare allies to deal with the giant battles so that the other guys can destroy the ring. And you can get it as complex as you want. You can get it as simple as you want. But if there's not something coherent that our characters are striving towards, so that every single character has a goal, but not only do they have individual goals, because you can say that they did in Legacy of the Confederation, it's just that they don't necessarily figure into the main story to the same degrees. The problem is like they're not at odds with each other, and so there isn't really a central conflict. Like introduced very late into the second campaign is the idea that the Oracle is guiding certain members of each individual race to free it. And by the way, the Oracle is actually a character in this campaign, so we'll just expect that that's like some sort of strange self-insert, but it is going to get kind of confusing when I'm referencing the Oracle just since I was just talking about the Oracle, the developer, the person. So try to read between the lines. But right now we're talking about the character of the Oracle. So the character of the Oracle is just like trapped in some sort of crystal prison, and his powers are ambiguous, but he's able to influence the events of the mortal races or whatever. Like we're not really sure if he's a Protoss or is he a Zelnaga or what. It's not really explained. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just that he's very clearly powerful. He's in control of a lot of different individuals. He's able to exert this power, and he wants to free himself. So that's what he's using his power for. He's influencing the minds of Terrans and Zerg, and at least he has the power to influence the Cerebrid as well. So we know that he's pretty powerful, and introduced very late into the second part of the campaign entirely, the second campaign in the series. We have this idea that he's trying to free himself with the help of Hydralisks and, well, I guess it's Zool, the Cerebrid, but Zool's Hydralisks are helping him. And then even later than that, you're introduced to the Guardians of his temple. And you don't know anything about the Guardians of his temple other than these Guardians at the Forbidden Temple, which is such a cliche, dumb, generic name. These protectors or whatever they are, their goal is to stop the Oracle. So you can say that, yes, those characters want to stop the Oracle, and the Oracle wants to free himself. So, of course, they're going to be at odds. That is where there's going to be a conflict. But that's not a central conflict to the main story. Like, it's presented sort of like it should be, but it's not, because it doesn't figure in everything else. And then it's, like, expositioned, basically retconned by giant paragraph text told to Hydralisks towards the end of that part 2, that actually the Oracle was behind all of this all along. So it is like, that's the twist. And that's why I say you don't necessarily want to have this weird non-linear story where half of the campaign's central conflict is kept in the dark. So going back to our Lord of the Rings example, imagine if the entire time we were, watching Frodo suffer and do all of this stuff, we didn't know that his objective was to go to Mount Doom and throw the ring. Now, all of a sudden, he's just wandering aimlessly around, but seemingly in some direction, but not really sure why. Like, if you cut out all of the contextual scenes that give us information as to what Frodo's goal is and what that band is, then all of a sudden, not only does his quest seem really silly and strange and seemingly without a goal, but so too does everything else. Like, we have some vague sense that the armies are gathering, but we don't know what they're gathering for. It's because of the fucking ring. Like, yes, it's a MacGuffin, but it's obviously, like, this is why the people are moving into action, right? It's spurring our characters and our factions into action. And without understanding this key context about this MacGuffin, we don't really know what's going on. And so that's basically it. Like, if that was just exposition to you in the last 20 minutes of the film, then obviously that would be really confusing. And nobody would understand why, like, anybody was doing anything until that point. It wouldn't feel nearly as much of a payoff, because we wouldn't have been aware until it was too late to care as to why that was happening, right? So everything would have felt aimless up until that point, and directionless. Or maybe we would have felt like the main story was about something completely different, which is the case with Legacy of the Confederation. We thought that the main story was about, like, the Confederation fighting the Zerg, but it turns out the main story was actually the Oracle, and the Oracle was behind the whole thing. Well, I don't get it. Like, why wasn't that figured in more? And I will say that there's a very outside chance that the one mission that I could not complete to completion was that really, really lengthy aimless Protoss mission, where at the end of it, at the end of my run, I finished an area where I was supposed to become a Dark Templar, and I finished leveling up my RPG character, and it just defeated me immediately, probably because I killed, like, an allied unit way at the beginning, so I fucked myself before even knowing. Might as well just be a choose-your-own-adventure game that you screw yourself over with or something. So maybe there was some more establishment there, and that somehow led you to believe that some of the events in the second part were related to the Oracle, but at that point, you're not reinforcing it enough anywhere else that I really feel like I would have probably forgotten. And maybe that's more of an issue with the execution and less an issue of the concept. Here, we're critiquing the concept, so maybe that undermines my critique somewhat. But I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that was not, thought through properly. So that's like a key critique, I think, to take in mind is, I felt like starting with the story just made the most sense. It was definitely the most insane thing about the whole thing, because the gameplay, I'll forget about it pretty quick, but the story is really insane. Now, I know some people obviously hate the gameplay way more, or like that was more of a jarring experience to them. Obviously, I've played Flame Knives and Eon of the Hawk. I'm steeled. I have nerves of steel, okay? I can handle your beacon puzzles. I can handle your dancing mix plays. I can even handle your, copyright strikes that will block my video worldwide. I don't give a shit, dude. I'm a professional, okay? I know what I'm doing. And I gotta tell you, this was some of the most insane stuff I've ever had to play in StarCraft. But it probably would have been a lot worse for me if I hadn't had my past experiences, which I guess you could say Legacy of the Confederation probably served as an inspiration to Metathrom and everybody else associated with that. So I'm really surprised at some of the content, but I also feel like even though it is more insane than everything else, like the to some degree, right? Obviously, some stuff was less insane. It was definitely a gradient, but I think if you stratify the gameplay that we had, all the experiences we had, some of the stuff on the far end of insanity is probably further out on that spectrum than anything else we've played before. I'm thinking like the elevator mission. I don't think any mission in Flame Knives was nearly as insane. And generally, Eon of the Hawk, I think, had more tolerable missions, but maybe I'm just not quite remembering it all. I could be mistaken in that respect. But yeah, I will say that Legacy of the Confederation definitely had some really insane stuff in it. Nothing really sticks out as truly like head and shoulders worse than everything else beyond stuff like the elevator simulator stuff and the fact that he did a retread of that with the Desler campaign. That was sick. I don't really think that any of the missions in Fallen Angel ascended to that level of mad. Maybe I'm just, repressing the memories, but obviously that was the campaign that I played most recently. Generally, those missions were just easy, even if they took a long time. Like, obviously, there's really poor player expression and gameplay communication. You're not really allowed to do as many strategies as you would want because you're barely allowed to macro in any of these campaigns. As far as Fallen Angel is concerned, the first mission's probably the worst, but the Protoss mission probably is a close second just because it's such a slog. It drags on for so long, but it doesn't really just defeat you out of nowhere the same way that the first mission does. And that's a mission where you do have to either get like a walkthrough or just rote memorization, like trial and error, die and over again until you figure out what's happening. And the amount of random shit that they throw at you is also insane. Like you have to guess patterns and do all this weird beacon stuff, and it was not great for sure. So that's probably about as specific as I'll get, though. Like, I feel like, save for a few outliers, the campaign was just terrible, and it only rarely did it get to the point where it was so far beyond terrible, so utterly antithetical to any sort of expression and gameplay that you would want in any game, let alone an RTS. Definitely, it was dreadful, but not so that I guess maybe because it was so terrible most of the time, it was one of those things where the truly terrible outliers just reminded me, it sort of made it feel better to go back to playing just the just terrible things, as strange as that is to say. Just because, by comparison, this is fine. So, of course, if you're looking at it in an objective sense, probably the worst campaign I've played. I feel like I've said that about a lot of campaigns that I've played. I probably said that about Insurrection or something. Like some of the stuff in Insurrection is pretty terrible, but I would so much rather play Insurrection than play Legacy of the Confederation. If I had to choose, if somebody was gun to my head and made me pick a campaign from the last while, I mean, this would be the worst one. Having to replay this would be the worst fate. So just pull the trigger at that point. But I guess that really sums up everything that I wanted to say about the gameplay. And at this point, the only thing we have left to talk about is the fact that, again, Legacy of the Confederation is considered to be this hallmark of the StarCraft custom content community. I don't get why. I don't understand why. I would much rather people go and say, yeah, Retribution was cool because it was bad, but it was macro, generally speaking, and I felt less aimless in that campaign than Legacy of the Confederation as far as story connection. And I was definitely playing the game for longer, much longer. Percentage of pausing and listening to voice acting or whatever is so minuscule in that campaign, especially compared to Legacy of the Confederation, but just in general. So that's way better. And then you have to ask yourself, I guess the reason why Legacy of the Confederation took off is just because, again, it has these elements of production value. It has these cutscenes and these, the actual cinematics that are either playing in the game or something that you have to watch on Jay Barrino's YouTube channel, which was hilarious. And yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that's like that. I mean, I don't know, dude. It's definitely a mess. It's terrible. I don't recommend anybody plays it. I've written as much in the custom campaign listing, but I mean, if you wanted to, the one thing I'll make an addendum to that. I'm not going to bother editing the Paceman because I do stand by that recommendation. But if you were going to play this, the one thing that you can like learn from it or gain from it is probably just understanding just how degenerate this community is or was. We'll say is to be safe. I've seen some pretty sick shit being not really released modernly, but in the past couple of years, about as modern as you could fucking get. And I think that when it comes down to it, like, there's a reason why this campaign was held in esteem. It's not because it was good. It was not because it was worthy of esteem. It's not because it was better than other campaigns. Because, like I said, this is a strong contender for worst I've ever played. Not like played recently, but ever. Like, lifetime fucking achievement award here. So if that's the case, and it actually does go down in history after I'm done with all these campaigns, every fucking thing in the listing, I've played them all, and I go back and I look at this. Like I said, man, this might be the worst. We might have just played the worst campaign series, all told, when you get them all together. But even just the second one, if you wanted to just pick a single one, probably part 2 because it was so fucking long, and it was just so much of the same shit. But yeah, I don't know, man. The fact that it's probably the worst, I'd say the worst so far, just to future-proof it again. This is what people like held in esteem alongside the retributions and the insurrections and whatever else. Antiochs, like Antioch is super tolerable compared to this. This is so great compared to this. Like, this really does put everything else to shame in terms of the terrible department. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand why this was held in esteem. I can't believe. Like, I don't mean that I'm in disbelief. I mean, like, I physically cannot allow myself to believe that the community held this up because of some fucking, like, bells and whistles. You know what I mean? It can't be that it was just the fact that it had cutscenes and the fact that it had custom portraits and the fact that it had, like, 2 fucking custom graphics in the entire thing. That can't be it. That can't be the only fucking thing that was responsible for it being heralded as one of the best. Or the best, or whatever people are saying about it and have said about it. Like, you guys realize I'm not the first person to stream this, right? Or play it online or whatever. There are videos of this campaign online, and people are in the comments section like, wow, so fun, XD. And Todd is not finding them. Find Todd. He's a double agent, man. He started to be a fucking Legacy of the Confederation character. He's part of the Keepers or Corridor 9 or something, dude. Oh my god, like that is such a shitty realization. That's such a fucking, like, that shakes you to your core. That's scary. Like, people have watched this and thought, this is a good campaign. Not just like, a good one. A good one, guys. It's a good one. It's shit.